In fall of 2018, I went to Southern California to help my sister move from one apartment to another. After moving all of her things, I decided to stay a few days to sightsee and experience the nice weather. My sister's new apartment was bigger than her previous one, so she started looking for furniture on Craigslist. I joined her in the search, and I was able to find a nice little table that would go perfectly in her new place. It seemed like a pretty good deal. I showed my sister, and she liked it a lot. I contacted the seller, and we agreed to meet the next day to buy the table. The seller was a man named Brian. He said he lived with his wife, and he seemed like a nice guy through our texts. My sister had to work the next day, so she gave me the cash, and I went to pick it up for her. I drove to Brian's house and arrived at 6 p.m., which was our meeting time. He lived in a pretty nice little neighborhood. The houses had a lot of character and were fairly close to each other. Brian's house was on the end. He had tall bushes all around his yard like a fence. I thought it looked pretty cool, and I texted him that I was there. He said he had the table in the garage and I could just walk right up and meet him in there. I got out of my car and walked up to his driveway. The driveway was very unique, as it went down like a hill and curved around the corner to his garage, which was connected to the back of his house and almost behind it. It was a 2-car garage, and I saw that it was open. I walked into the garage, but I didn't see Brian. It was a dimly lit garage, but it looked pretty typical, with some paint containers, spare tires, and things like that along the sides. There were no cars in the garage, however. I saw that the table was next to a door leading to his house. I started to walk up to the door to knock on it for Brian. As I approached the house door, I heard the garage door shut behind me. As soon as the door shut, all of the lights went out. The garage turned pitch black and I couldn't see a thing. Now I had a bad feeling about this. I felt my way to the door and turned the knob, but it was locked. I texted Brian asking what was going on, but the number had blocked me. I knew I was in danger and I needed to get out of there. I used the flashlight on my phone to look around the garage and felt my way to the garage door. I then tried to see if I could find a handle on it anywhere, but I couldn't find one. I started to bang on the door and kick at it. I was hoping I could either break it down or a neighbor would hear the noise and come. The door to the house then swung open. I looked over to see a man enter the garage. The house was dimly lit inside, so it didn't light up the garage at all and I couldn't really make out much of the man. He shut the door behind him and I could hear him walk towards me slowly. I shined my flashlight, but he was too far away for me to make him out still. I heard his footsteps walk along the edge of the garage. I looked around frantically and saw another door behind some wood pieces. I pushed them aside and even threw one in his direction. I don't think it hit him because I heard them hit the floor, but I tried the handle of the door, and to my surprise, it opened. I ran out as fast as I could and sprinted down the driveway to my car. I got in and immediately called the police. When they arrived, I led them to the house, but Brian, or whatever his name was gone. I later learned that the house belonged to a man who was out of town and someone had broke into it to stage the Craigslist ad. I don't know what could have happened to me in the garage, but I'm just happy I was able to get away. A couple years ago, I was living in a small place in New York. I had gotten some cabinets off of Craigslist that I liked a lot. I wasn't able to install them by myself, however, so I went back on Craigslist to find somebody that could. I found a man named Jim, who had really low rates. So wanting to save money, I contacted him and told him about my cabinets. He responded quickly, saying he could do it. We arranged for him to come over and install the cabinets the next day. It was a Saturday when he came, and it was about 10 o'clock in the morning. Right off the bat, he gave me the creeps. We spoke briefly about the job, and he just seemed a little bit off. I felt a little concerned letting this man into my house that I lived alone in, but I thought chances are it will be fine, and after a couple more minutes of awkward silence, he got to work. It was a pretty easy job for someone with experience, and he seemed to have no problem with it. I went into another room to go on my computer, but he kept asking me to come back and watch. I thought that was kind of strange. He would always pause and look over at me for a second, and then go back to work. I told myself I was just being paranoid, and I tried to ignore my uneasy feelings. At one point, I went back into the other room on my computer, and I heard him stop working, and then I saw his head come from around the corner just to look at me. I was getting really tired of it. Finally, when he was done, I paid him the money and told him to have a good day. He insisted on hugging me before walking out the door. I was so glad he was finally gone, and told some friends about the experience. I was able to laugh it off as just another creepy guy. The rest of the day was good, and after watching a movie on TV, I started to drift off to sleep. I was very relaxed until I thought I heard the noise of my back door open slowly. I knew I wasn't hearing things, but I muted the TV to listen closer. It was definitely my back door, and when it stopped, I scrambled out of bed and walked to my bedroom doorway and looked out. I saw the man from earlier walking around the corner. Our eyes locked for a split second, and I quickly slammed my door shut and locked it. I heard him walk right up to the door and try the knob. I screamed at him that I was calling the police and ran to my nightstand to grab my phone. I dialed 911 and started telling them what was going on. They told me to stay on the line until the police arrived. The man started banging on the door trying to break it. He banged for about a minute and then it went quiet. I heard him walk away. But not even 30 seconds later, I heard him again. He came right back to the door and started jiggling the handle a lot, and then he started banging again. It started to look like the door was about to break off the hinges. I thought about jumping out the window or hiding in my closet. Just when I didn't think I could take any more, I heard sirens from outside. A couple seconds later, I heard someone shout police, and then the man started yelling. After about a minute, I came out of the room to see the man arrested and several police in my house. It was a scary incident, and I haven't used Craigslist since. Recently, I decided to sell my laptop because I got one with more memory capacity. It was a pretty nice laptop, and I was selling it for $400. I figured it would sell pretty quickly because it was worth a little more than that. Sure enough, somebody contacted me about it. He said his name was Robert and he was very interested in the laptop. He offered me the full price and asked if we could meet the next day. I said yes, and he wanted to meet at my house, but I suggested we meet at a coffee shop. He agreed to it, and the next day I went to the coffee shop with my laptop. The meeting time was 5:30 p.m. He showed up on time and came over and introduced himself to me. He seemed like a pretty average guy. I showed him the laptop and let him look at it. He said he liked it, but then said he didn't get paid until tomorrow, so we would have to meet again then for him to buy it. I was pretty annoyed by this because I thought he was going to purchase it then and there, but I didn't feel like arguing with the man, so I said I would see him tomorrow and left the shop. I was a little frustrated, and after thinking about it, I figured he probably wouldn't even buy it the next day. I thought about putting the ad back up, but then I decided to give him another chance, and I drove home. It was about a 10-minute drive back to my house, and when I was almost home, I noticed the same car had been behind me the entire drive. I turned off onto my street, and the car continued to follow. As I pulled into my driveway, the car kept driving down the street, but I didn't recognize it as a neighbor's. I went inside. About 30 minutes later, I noticed the car was parked on the side of the street across from my house. I started to feel concerned. I looked closer to see if I could see who was in the car, and when I did, I saw it was the man from Craigslist looking at me. He then drove off. I tried calling him, but the number had blocked me. I never heard from him or saw him again. I don't know why he followed me home, if he was planning to rob me or whatever, but I just hope I never see him again. When I was in college, I attended a fairly large university. I had a small apartment about a mile outside of campus. I needed a roommate, but all of my friends already had places, so I put an ad on Craigslist for one. A guy named Peter responded to my ad and asked if he could see the place. I agreed, and the next day he showed up to look at it. He seemed like an average guy to me. He said he didn't attend the university, but he worked nearby. Overall, he seemed like a pretty nice guy. Everything went by normally, but I just had a bad feeling about him for whatever reason. After looking at the place, he left, and I said I would get back to him shortly. Later that night, I was just relaxing and flipping through channels on the TV. The news was on, and they were talking about a murder that had happened. They had just caught the suspect, and when they showed his picture, it was the same man that looked at my place. I couldn't believe my eyes. Needless to say, I didn't end up having him as my roommate for that apartment. Recently, my family decided to sell our washer and dryer machines. They worked well, but we were planning on redoing our basement and wanted something newer that would go with the design. We decided to sell them on Craigslist before we would purchase new ones. A man named Kevin responded to the ad and asked if he could look at them. My parents told me that if I could sell them to the guy, they'd give me $50. When he got there, I went outside to greet Kevin. He drove an old beat-up van, and when he got out, I could see there were at least 2 other grown men in the car. I told him to come inside and let him into the basement. Once we got down there, I started to show him the machines, but he didn't seem too interested in them. Instead, he just looked around our basement. Even though we were planning to redo our basement, it was still pretty nice. It was just outdated. We had a TV and some video games, and a bar with some seating. I tried to get Kevin to pay attention to what I was saying by asking him questions like if he had a washing machine or what he thought of it. He would just say things like, "Yeah, and that's nice." Then I heard the basement door open and heard several footsteps coming down the stairs. I saw 4 men enter the room and just stare at me. I looked at them confused. Kevin then walked over to them and they began talking. I stood there not knowing what to do and not saying a word. Kevin came over to me and told me they were going to take everything nice that we had. Just after that, I heard the basement door open again and my dad entered the room with his gun and shouted at them. The men all ran up the stairs and left. The police were called, but the men were long gone. My dad said when he heard the men enter the house, he got suspicious to see what was going on. It was one of the scariest moments of my life.